All right, folks. So last time we met, we talked about some of the updates with Texas Department of State Health Services. And I wanted to use this year-end meeting as an opportunity to expand upon, the developments that have taken place this year with the cancer cluster and Greater Fifth Ward, talk about our place as THEA within the community and where we hope to head in 2021. I am Jackie Medcalf, and I'm the Executive Director of Texas Health and Environment Alliance. And if you bear with me one moment, I just want to make sure we have a setting in place. Okay, I think we're good to go. Okay, before we get into our main topics, just some general housekeeping. All of the lines should be muted at this time, and then at the end of the presentation, the lines will be unmuted, and you can click your you can click the microphone icon to unmute yourself to engage, ask questions, share your comments or concerns. But also, if you don't feel like speaking here on the Zoom and you have questions or concerns, you can certainly drop those in the chat or follow up with us afterwards. I typically try to keep these meetings to an hour. I know most people have worked all day. They're tired, you're hungry probably, so I want to be sure that we are all respectful of one another and one another's time, and that everyone can be here and learn and engage and then get back with their families. Okay, our mission at THEA is to protect public health and the environment from the harmful effects of toxic waste. We are a 501c3 nonprofit organization, and we are 5 years old. So I founded THEA in 2015, and we had our 5th birthday this year. We got involved with the health concerns in Fifth Ward because we were asked by local residents and others to help lend our resources and expertise to the community when it comes to the complex environmental issues, and then also the concerns that cancer and other disease is at abnormally high rates within the community. So here you see several maps, and I know it looks like a lot on the screen. But basically what I want to demonstrate to you is how complex the environmental issues are within the community. And, not only is there the Union Pacific creosote contamination, which is the RCRA site listed here, and the map here to the bottom right, where you see several different blue plumes of groundwater contamination. There's also the 2 Superfund sites, the North Cavalcade site and the South Cavalcade Superfund site. There's also hundreds of abandoned gas stations. There's hundreds of abandoned dry cleaners. And so these types of abandoned facilities, as well as maybe current day facilities, can be notorious polluters. And so there are a lot of efforts to redevelop and revitalize the community and assess whether or not these abandoned places are causing harm to the environment or a threat potentially to the environment and the health of the local communities. We want to be a central resource to help the community understand these various processes. One thing that I've been so impressed with the efforts in Fifth Ward is how many people have taken a seat at the table to provide resources and assistance, whether they're toxicologists, scientists, chemists, health experts for one of our government agencies, folks from different universities, local churches, local community groups. There's really been a great effort for people coming together. But one of the things that I hear is that people show up and then sometimes there's not a lot of action to follow that. And so I want to make sure that heading into 2021, that we're not one of those groups, that we continue having a consistent presence within the community. So we know that in the end of 2019 and then in the spring of 2020, Texas Department of State Health Services confirmed elevated rates of cancer in adults within the communities that you see on the maps here, which we're calling Greater Fifth Ward, but that includes Kashmere Gardens, the Trinity area, and so there's not just Greater Fifth Ward in and of itself. And so I wanted to make sure that, we're all understanding we're talking about really the downtown area, just north and south of Interstate 10 within that 610 loop. And so the state confirmed multiple types of cancer at abnormally high rates. Those are acute myeloid leukemia, esophagus cancer, larynx cancer, liver cancer, lung and bronchus cancer. And now we're in a pandemic. We have communities that have been threatened by invisible contaminants, whether it's been in the air, the water, or the creosote pits they unknowingly played in growing up. And now we have a pandemic where there's this new threat, and we're just starting to see that these communities also have abnormal rates of deaths from COVID. And so the area that we have primarily focused on, and in part will continue focusing on, is this cancer cluster and making sure that the community is truly being advocated for in the way that they need to be. So after the state confirmed these elevated rates of cancer, their next step to stay in guidelines with the CDC, or the Center for Disease Control, the next step is to take the next step is setting up an expert panel where you then assess the feasibility of doing a full epidemiological study. And so a full epidemiological study is a pretty rare thing because not only are they incredibly expensive, but oftentimes communities are left unsatisfied. It is really difficult to show that a particular contaminant caused a particular type of cancer in a particular time period. And when you're doing a full epidemiological study and you're going door to door, you're in the community, you're meeting with people, you're gaining as much information about the community as possible, it's still hard to be able to look back and fully understand, truly understand what all happened over many, many decades to the environment and to the health of the people in the community. And so looking at taking that next step, there are several things that have to be considered. And so to have the discussion if that next step would be feasible or not, the Texas Department of State Health Services set up a panel of experts. And so I was incredibly impressed with the panel of experts that they set up. Many of the experts, if not, I'd say greater than 90%, were local experts. That's fantastic. I've been on one of these panels before for communities on the east side, and we weren't so lucky. I mean, we had, pediatricians from New York and all over, and they were not willing to accept our local experts, which would have been fantastic because almost nobody knows better about a local community, the issues in the community, the health of the community, than the locals themselves. So I was really impressed at the number of local experts from academia, health experts, scientists, that the state gave a seat at this table. They also allowed one member from each of the sub-communities within this study area to be a part of this panel. We briefly touched on this last time that we met. And so that's why tonight I wanted to go a little bit deeper into exactly what was recommended in this meeting, and then what the state has said they will do in response to what the experts recommended. Okay, so this is from the report that you just saw the cover of, and the outcome of the experts meeting was that it is not feasible to do a full epidemiological study. I'm not surprised that this was the outcome. One of the things we've told the community is to please be prepared for this to be the outcome. We want to make sure that folks have realistic expectations, and that, just because the end determination of this meeting was that it is not feasible to do a full study, it doesn't mean that future items are not going to take place. It doesn't mean that you can't look outside of our state health department for resources. Something I always advocate for is partnerships with academia, with universities who study public health, who study the relationship between contaminants in our environment and health impacts. So I'm going to go through a couple of pages that look very similar to this, talking about why why they said it was not feasible. So it says here that based on the information discussed during the meeting, the subject matter expert group determined that an epidemiological study of the associations between specific cancer and environmental contaminants in the area investigated is not feasible. Some factors identified by the expert group include the following. Okay, so one of the items that they identified is that there are many possible risk factors of cancer outside of the creosote contamination. And I thought this was really interesting because when Texas Department of State Health Services conducted the assessment of occurrences of cancer, they say plain as day in their reports that they've published that their objective is not to associate the creosote contamination with the types of cancer found. So it was more of an independent view of what is the health of the community versus did this creosote cause this cancer. And so I thought it was a little interesting here that, one of the items discussed in this meeting was, that it is not feasible because there are many possible risk factors outside of the creosote exposure. And bringing that back to one of the first slides I showed in this presentation where, I mentioned the several Superfund sites, the abandoned gas stations, the lead in homes. That's something I think I left out earlier. And it is true, the environmental issues here are very complex. Okay, they further went on to say that there are too many limitations to determine whether environmental exposure to creosote is occurring. There needs to be a better understanding of current and historical exposures. Okay, so my 2 cents on that one. I really appreciated this point because I feel like in most areas that we work within when it comes to contamination in the environment, I don't feel like efforts are exhausted to see if there are in fact routes of exposure, if people are in fact right now being exposed. It's nearly impossible, right, to ever go back and figure out through time what exactly happened, where and when. But I think that we oftentimes fall short looking at what is going on today. We might not be able to go back into the past, decades back, but what's going on today? And so I appreciated that they pointed out this factor here. Okay, next point. Questions about disease latency and lack of information regarding residential history prevents one from forming a testable hypothesis. One of the ways that I hope that we can continue to make our way around this item is by the deep roots that are within the community. Those community members who have moved away, who are still involved in the community, who still, attend church within the community or are linked to family members that are still there today. Being able to talk to folks who may not still reside in the community today, but did at one time is also very, very important. Okay, given the limited environmental data available, it is unclear if exposure is occurring. Therefore, it is not possible to come up with a testable hypothesis. In order to do an epidemiological study, you have to have a hypothesis. You have to have something that you are looking at potentially answering or disproving. And so that's why you're seeing time and time again, that they're not finding it reasonable to be able to come up with a hypothesis you can test and see if it actually holds. Okay, the cancer assessments are a preliminary look at cancers occurring in the community using Texas Cancer Registry data. A full-scale epidemiological study will be resource and time intensive. The results of the epidemiological study would not prove causation. Okay, so now you're seeing clips from another document that Texas Department of State Health Services sent to me. And so these next couple of slides are what the expert panel, the set of things that the expert panel recommended to the state. Then we're going to look at what the state's actually going to do based off of these 7 recommendations. Okay, so first, reconsider the time frame selected for analysis to include 1995 to 1999 and for the years after 2016. I full-heartedly agree. We have sent several letters to Texas Department of State Health Services asking for this exact same thing. The Texas Cancer Registry has available data from 1995 to 2016. However, for these studies, for whatever reason, the state only looked at data from 2000 to 2016. So they didn't include those first few years of available data. We need them to be looking at all possible available data. The second, conduct an exposure assessment for the community in the area surrounding the former creosote facility. Okay, the third item recommended by the panel. Depending on the exposure assessment results, consider conducting biomonitoring activities to determine whether people have been exposed to contaminants from the former creosote facility, along with a community survey to gain a better understanding of occupational and long-term exposures and other risk factors. Biomonitoring would be things like potentially hair sampling, blood sampling, urine sampling, actually testing humans within the community and monitoring them to see what their levels of particular contaminants are. All right, the fourth recommendation, investigate the need for additional environmental monitoring of off-site soil, groundwater, and indoor air for vapor intrusion. One of the items that we've learned more recently is that the city of Houston has started their sampling of the vapors that are within the soil in areas within the community. So that sampling has started taking place, and I'm hoping that by the time we meet again, that data will be available and we'll be able to discuss the results. Number 5. Because there are many other known risk factors for the types of cancers identified by the assessments, explore ways to provide community education on how to mitigate known risk factors and to promote and conduct more cancer screening in the area. This is great. We always fully support, education, outreach, and engagement. And I really also appreciated this recommendation. Number 6, share community concerns about TCEQ's regulation and oversight of the Union Pacific Railroad's actions to clean up soil and groundwater contamination with the TCEQ. TCEQ, they're referring to Texas Commission on Environmental Quality. That's our state environmental entity, which is separate from Texas Department of State Health Services. And 7, calculate standardized incident ratios. Basically, look at the rates of childhood cancers, naming acute lymphocytic leukemia and acute myeloid leukemia and cancers of urinary systems in adults, includes cancers of kidneys and renal, pelvis, uterine, and urinary organs, if there are sufficient cases. Okay, so right here, I just want to point out before we move on, the panel of experts, this last point, number 7, they have recommended for the state to look at the rates of 2 types of childhood leukemia. To date, the state has not looked at any types of childhood cancer within the community, only adults over the age of 20. And then also these additional types of cancer within adults. Okay, so here's what the state has agreed to. So this is a snip from the letter from the state responding to the experts in writing. It says the conclusion, based on external subject matter expert group determination, Department of State Health Services will not pursue an epidemiological study related to the community's concerns regarding the occurrence of cancer in the area surrounding the former creosote facility in Houston, Texas. Department of State Health Services carefully considered the expert group's suggestion and will conduct the following activities. All right, side note, if you just recall, I read you 7 recommendations from the panel of experts. There's only 3 points here. So the state has agreed to do an additional cancer assessment to include years past 2016 upon request and when data becomes available. So data may not be available for more recent years. The Texas Cancer Registry typically lags several years behind. The second thing that they've agreed to do, an exposure health assessment to investigate possible exposure pathways in the community immediately surrounding the site and possibly impacted by the former site's activities. Okay, so what they're referring to here is the Union Pacific site, the creosote contamination that came from that facility. And I think this is a really positive step. I love to see this. I don't see this often, that they are in fact agreeing to assess what exposure pathways are. And I think that's a really, really strong agreement here. And it's something that community, something that the public needs to make sure that they're accountable for, and to make sure that this actually gets done, that it's a transparent process, and that the information is being provided to the community members in ways that we can all understand. Okay, the third thing that the state has agreed to do, an assessment of childhood cancers, acute lymphocytic leukemia and acute myeloid leukemia, and cases of adult cancers, including kidney, renal pelvis, ureter, and urinary organs in the area of the 21 census tracts. So they've agreed to what the panel recommended when it comes to the extra types of cancer that they're going to look at for adults, and then to look at 2 types of leukemia for children. But that's not where we want to stop. So we have sent several letters to Texas Department of State Health Services asking them to look at more types of cancer. Children in particular, we need them to be looking at multiple types of cancer in children. Our children are among the best indicators. They are among our most vulnerable populations. And oftentimes you will see that it can be our children affected because they are lower to the ground. So if there are vapors coming up from the ground, they're lower to the ground. They respirate at a greater rate than adults. So they could be taking in and distributing throughout their body more of these toxic vapors than a human, than an, I'm sorry, not a human, than an adult, than, an adult-sized person would be. They, are also oftentimes more in the soil, playing in the dirt, playing in the local environment than an adult would be. They also oftentimes have not moved around as much as an adult would have during their lifespan. And children don't oftentimes have lifestyles that can cause adverse health effects like some adults do. And so it's a lot harder when you find abnormally high rates of cancer in children. It is a lot harder to make excuses for why there might be high occurrences of cancer within a particular community. So why is THEA here? We were asked by community members and others to be a resource for the community, to help the community understand and navigate this process. But before that, why we set out to help communities with issues like this, to help educate communities about toxins in the environment, what it could mean for their health, and help navigate people through these types of cancer assessments. It's because myself and some of our founding board knows exactly what it feels like to be in the shoes of these communities. We know what it feels like to not fully understand what all of this means, to not know what you should be asking for, or even what your right is to be asking for, or to be engaged in which of these various processes. So, we personally are very, very invested in making sure that people know what their options are to be involved, what their rights are to be engaged, to be their own advocate, and to help provide assistance so that communities don't get, half of the picture looked at, because we see that, they're looking over here at multiple types of adult cancer, but they're not looking at the children. And so to make sure that these little details that can be so critical and our children so important are being looked at. So we sent a letter to Texas Department of State Health Services and again asked for several things. The letter, we thanked them for setting up a panel of experts that had almost all local experts, for taking the steps that they have for doing multiple assessments for the occurrences of specific cancers within the community. But, are noting there are several things that we still need to see. The first, in reference to recommendation 7, which calls for the calculation of standardized incident ratios for certain childhood cancers, Department of State Health Services should include the following additional childhood cancer types in their calculations: liver, kidney, acute myeloid leukemia, esophageal, this is one I wrote but I haven't said out loud, obviously, hepatic, probably butchering that, I really apologize, bile duct, larynx, lung, and bronchus, nose and nasal cavity, other biliary and urinary bladder. These are mostly types of cancer that they've looked at in adults and types of cancer that we're seeing in our health surveys within the community. Okay, then I carry on to say, although we greatly appreciate Department of State Health Services' willingness to look at certain childhood cancers as an important indicator of community health, it's important to include all of these cancers in order to generate accurate data. Okay, the second item, based on cancers we're observing in the communities, we ask that Department of State Health Services assess the rates of lymphoma in adults and children. That's for Hodgkin's and non-Hodgkin's. We're seeing this in our health surveys. Now, just because we're seeing this when we are surveying folks within the community, it doesn't necessarily mean that it's an abnormally high rate, but the chance is there. So we're asking for these specific types of cancer to be looked at within the Texas Cancer Registry's database. Okay, additionally, Department of State Health Services should look at rates of skin cancer in people of all ages. Page 4 in the meeting summary explains that skin cancer was not included in the assessment due to a low case count. This count, however, only includes cases of skin cancer in adults, and no explanation was provided as to why cases of skin cancer in children were excluded. Lastly, the fourth thing we ask is that Department of State Health Services should perform an assessment of the birth defect registry for birth defects diagnosed within the geographical area for all years available. According to the Agency for Toxic Substance and Disease Registry, studies have shown that creosote may cross the placenta, getting into the tissue of the fetus. As such, this data may prove crucial to getting a fuller understanding of the impacts of creosote exposure in our communities. The placenta is the lifeline for a fetus, a baby that's developing in a mother's womb. And I was researching, creosote and cancer, and creosote and childhood cancer, and, these different contaminants in the community, and what are, known or associated outcomes when it comes to our health. And when I saw that, studies have actually shown that creosote might cross the placenta and make its way to an unborn child. Um, I thought that, it was really necessary to be asking for the state to be looking at the birth defect registry, because they have access to the Texas Cancer Registry and they have access to the birth defect registry, and they've not yet looked at birth defects for the area. And so that is the fourth ask that we made of them most recently. All right, so talking about where we are headed in 2021. Okay, so we will continue advocating on behalf of public health, continue reviewing the reports that come out, reviewing the latest information and data, and doing our best to make sure that folks are really really going to get the best outcome out of these items. And in order for that to happen, the state needs to be looking at the right things. The Houston and Harris County health departments need to be looking at the right parameters. And so we're going to continue, lending our expertise in those areas. In January of 2021, we are putting together a meeting for local community members, local leaders, and we want to hear from y'all what your top, say, 10 or 15 concerns are when it comes to the environment and public health. That way we can put together a plan on what the needs are of the community in these two arenas, the environmental issues and public health, and how we can facilitate some of those concerns. We can look at, all right, here's a set of the top concerns of the community. Where do we have expertise? Where do we have resources or connections? Where within these concerns can we help? And so in order to figure that out, in order to best serve y'all, we are working to put together a meeting in January. So if you would like to join us, please let us know. We would be happy for you to join us, happy for you to share your concerns, your questions, and join us in this meeting that we hope is going to be really productive. And we want people from, Greater Fifth Ward or Northeast Houston, if you will, the areas of Kashmere Gardens and the communities that hover between downtown and 610 East, around the I-10 corridor. We really want to make sure that our efforts within the community are really truly best serving the community. And in order to do that, we have to hear from y'all. We want to be a consistent and reliable community resource. As I said earlier, we hear from community members that people come into the community and say they're going to offer services or say that they can help, and then there's not much action or not much follow-up. And I know that's not always the case, but I know that the community is sick of seeing people swoop in and swoop out. And so that's not what we're here to do. We want to best serve the community and be a consistent resource that folks know, hey, I have a question about this Superfund site. Who can I contact? You can contact THEA, and THEA is going to help mitigate those concerns or help provide you with the answers or resources you need. So that's something that we're looking becoming more established in the next year. Okay. Lastly, we need you to help us help you. As you can see here, from the pictures that, Lyons Avenue, as many of y'all know that you've lived through, was once a booming corridor. And now there are a lot of vacant or abandoned properties or lots. And, there's a lot of revitalization going on within the community. But with that, we also have to ensure that people who are living there today, people who are going to be there in the future, are not being exposed to potential contaminants in the environment. And so every voice matters, every single voice counts, and your local knowledge is essential to making sure these processes work and that we can effectively help in the effort to protect public health. So please share your concerns with our team. If you hear something, say something. It's really important that, you know, if you see something in the community that you're concerned about, if you see these these puddles or the runoff after rain events and there's the rainbow sheen on them that people have talked about, seeing historically, let us know. Let Harris County Pollution Control know. There's no better advocate than yourself. I ask that you fill out a confidential THEA health survey. That will help us be the best advocate to Texas Department of State Health Services, and we never share your personal contact information with them. We only use the types of disease to advocate to them. For example, how we knew to ask for the state to look at lymphoma. We did not say we're seeing lymphoma on this street or anything even specific about where it is. We're just say we're seeing lymphoma in the community. We need you to look into rates of lymphoma. And so the last thing that, I say time and time again to the community that I come from that, experienced living with several Superfund sites, and to all the communities that we work with, that if you don't fight for your community, who will? We need each and every one of you. All right, and now I will go ahead and stop sharing my screen, and I will open it up to questions. Okay, so I'm unmuting all the lines right now, and you will have to unmute yourself on your end in order to ask a question or provide any kind of feedback, address your concerns with us. And we have a couple of people who are on the phone line, but if you are not on the phone line, if you are on Zoom, you can also drop your questions in the chat. All right, everyone should be unmuted at this time. And we have a question in the chat. Yes, you can absolutely share the health survey. I would love for you to share the health survey. They have proven to be so valuable for helping in some of the other communities we've worked with that uncover types of cancer that we didn't realize were going on in the community. For example, the way that the Texas Cancer Registry works is you might think that they can look at all types of cancer diagnosed within an area in that time frame, but they can't. They can only go into the registry and pull cancer data by each individual type of cancer. So for example, they have not pulled rates of lymphoma or let's say childhood leukemia. And you might read the reports and think, well, we're okay for those because they didn't say they were at abnormal rates. But that's not the case. We don't know if they're at abnormal rates or not because they haven't looked at the data, because they haven't been asked. They haven't, been informed that they should look for those specific types of cancer. So the health surveys are so important. And I would love for any and all of you to take a moment to share those with your friends. There's a link in the chat. You can also find it on our website under programs, the Community Health Survey. All right. Let's see. Does anybody else have any other questions? I want to make sure I give you guys some time. I know sometimes I don't hit the right buttons on the phone or on the Zoom to unmute. Okay, so you can contact THEA at a later time if you'd like, if you have any questions or any concerns through our website, which is txhea.org, or through our info email, which is info@txhea.org. And we can get back to you there. We can address your concerns, your questions there through either of those methods of communication. And as usual, you can also call our office number. For folks on the line, let's see, we'll go ahead and give you the office number as well. It is 281-315-5242. I'm also dropping this in the chat. But for folks on the line, it's 281-315-5242. Let us know if you want to join us at thank you, team members, for dropping that for me. Let us know if you want to join us at the January meeting where, we're hoping to host community members and community leaders to identify your top environmental and public health concerns within the community. I will not be on here likely to host another meeting until the new year. So I hope that you all have a lovely holiday season, and I will see you in 2021. Good night, everyone.